Director of the Office of Policy for Pharmaceutical Quality in the Center for Drugs, and I'm happy to welcome you to this panel session. We have a great lineup of folks here today. We will start with some introductions, then we have some prepared questions for our panelists to address, and then we hope that you'll drop lots of questions in the chat pod so we can answer your questions as well. I'd like to start with some introductions. You all know Dr. Michael Kopcha, who gave our keynote this morning. Can I ask Dr. Theresa Mullen to introduce yourself, please?
Good afternoon. Theresa Mullen. I'm the Associate Director for Strategic Initiatives in FDA Center for Drugs. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening.
Thank you, Theresa. Don Ashley?
Hey, Ashley. Very nice to be here. I'm Donald Ashley. I'm the Director of the Office of Compliance at CDER. Thanks.
Thanks. And Elizabeth Miller?
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Elizabeth Miller. I'm with the Office of Regulatory Affairs, and I am the Assistant Commissioner for Medical Products and Tobacco Operations.
Thank you so much. So as we all know, the last year to 18 months has been quite challenging. And so I'd like to start with a question for all of our panelists today. How did your part of the organization balance the additional work created by COVID-19 with the standing work you all already had? Maybe we'll start with Don.
Thanks, Ashley. So thinking back on that, it seems so long ago in some ways, but it wasn't really. But, you know, during the initial months of the pandemic, like most organizations, we adapted in CDER compliance, frankly, through sheer adrenaline, a lot of coffee, and longer hours. But after a few months, we began to do a better job, I think, of developing new procedures to handle the increased and varied workload. For example, we developed a streamlined and very disciplined process for handling the increased number of regulatory discretion requests that CDER was receiving. And new procedures, such as this were adopted across CDER, which I think has helped tame the increased workload a bit as time has gone by.
Thanks, Don. Over to you, Elizabeth.
Hey, thank you. And I think, as many of you are aware, the Office of Regulatory Affairs needed to quickly adapt. The pandemic required us to rework our business operations to carry out our public health mission of inspections, but doing this while protecting our workforce and the workforces of those we regulate. Over the past year and a half, our approach to ensuring the safety of products we regulate has been both risk-based and deliberate. We continue with mission-critical inspections in both the domestic and foreign arena. We formalized our remote assessment activities for records requests, as described in SMGs and processes and procedures that have been documented and memorialized in our quality management systems. And as folks probably are going to talk about more, in April of 2021, we put out, in collaboration with our CDER and CBER colleagues, a guidance detailing our current thinking on how we would conduct remote interactive evaluations. Our staff, including our field investigators, analysts, laboratorians, import reviewers, among others, adjusted schedules and stepped up to do what was needed. I'm really proud of the resiliency from our investigators that volunteered to conduct early on both the domestic and foreign assignments under enormous constraints, including doing so before the advent of vaccines availability and with requirements to quarantine in restrictive conditions in some areas and countries for up to 14 days prior to starting an inspection, as well as being required to download tracking applications on their personal devices. So as boots on the ground, our field investigators really needed to pivot, how we were being trained, how we were conducting our operations, and how we were looking at products that were offered for import. Thank you, Ashley.
Thanks so much. Mike, would you care to share some of your experience from the OPQ perspective?
Sure, I'd be happy to, Ashley. Thanks a lot. For me, as I sit here and think about this, there's a quote that always comes to mind for me, and I've shared it with my leadership team over and over again. And it's a quote from Darwin. And the quote states that it's not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the ones that are more responsive to change. And that really resonates with me because as I look at the OPQ organization, it really demonstrated and continues to demonstrate, at least to me, the incredible agility and adaptability in responding to the constant and in some cases the unprecedented work that we really needed to take on. We balanced the need to prioritize and reprioritize our work, so we always had to go through that because as you can imagine during the pandemic, things changed rather quickly and it had an influence on the work that we do. But, we needed to keep our eye on and deliver on the mission. We have UFA deadlines that we needed to meet. So, everybody was well aware of the work that needed to be done, even on top of the work we were doing to address the pandemic. So it really kept people focused, and that mission really kept people and kind of gave them the guidance that they needed. As I look across OPQ, along with our colleagues, both from ORA as well as in the Office of Compliance, we use the opportunity to be innovative and creative to deliver on that mission. For example, things like remote interactive evaluations, mutual recognition agreements we had to make use of, and we really had to leverage technology to its fullest extent to communicate with each other in a virtual environment. And as you can imagine initially, and I think a lot of you may have experienced this as well, it wasn't an easy thing to do initially. But then as we got the hang of it and understood the technology better, it became more and more easy to work with. And then finally, the one thing that really resonates with me and the thing that I really wanted to highlight is that we needed to depend upon our people. We look at, across the CDER organization and even outside of CDER with our colleagues that are outside of the CDER Center. We're all public servants, and each of us has the passion and really commitment to protecting the American public. And it's something that we really took to heart and really helped guide us through this pandemic and the work we needed to do. So Ashley, I think I'll leave it at that because I can probably continue for a while longer, but I think that was really kind of the things I wanted to highlight. So thank you.
Thank you, Mike. So Theresa, working in the global regulatory environment, I imagine saw both a real increase in a need to collaborate with our global partners, but also such challenges because we couldn't travel.
Oh,
Can you
okay.
speak to your experience?
Yes. Well, and in fact, in terms of the additional work and really the international work for many of our experts, well, for all of our experts, really is in addition to their day job. So to this question, Ashley, as you say, my organization, we have the international program within my organization, and so I'm going to speak in particular to the ICH, the International Council on Harmonization work, and I'm currently the chair of the ICH Management Committee. Now, the Management Committee of ICH has oversight of the various expert working groups, and they're developing these harmonized guidelines. And CDER experts play a key role in developing all of these guidelines, and there are more than 30 of them in flight right now, undergoing active work. And so really to try to balance the added workload of this harmonization work, which is critically important, but it isn't, it's continuing on, started before the pandemic, will continue on during and after. But the experts from FDA, but also from our other regulatory colleagues at EMA and PMDA, a Japanese agency, the other regulatory authorities and industry involved, and just about everyone is experiencing some increase in workload. Certainly the regulators have felt this. And so we've adjusted the timelines for progressing this harmonization work, pushing out the timeframes for the harmonized guidelines by 6 to 12 months on average, in some cases even a little bit longer. And the groups are now working remotely, as you say, Ashley. They've been having to very much learn every version of Teams, Zoom, WebEx, you name it. and working across time zones around the world, which makes it challenging because of just how that can kind of limit not in the meetings and the discussion of these difficult topics in many ways. But people have really continued to progress the work, and so, but with trying to give people a little bit of breathing room in terms of the pace at which they're proceeding. So I'll leave it with that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next question for this group, and I invite anyone to weigh in on this, is to comment on some of what we've seen industry do to adapt to the pandemic that you'd like to see continue in the long term, hopefully after the pandemic's concluded. Elizabeth, can we start with you?
Sure, thanks. And I do think in response to COVID-19, the industry was really forced to rethink how to operate safely while continuing to provide needed medicines, as all businesses in this, global pandemic. As a result, we saw many innovative and creative solutions. Industry was very forthright in reaching out through letters and requests for regulatory meetings, offering solutions that could be beneficial. And as we've been responding to this in creative and innovative ways, I think many of these solutions will continue to be beneficial, even hopefully at the soon conclusion of this pandemic. For example, I think firms that were operating on a mainly paper-based systems, they made their records accessible electronically to allow for regulatory agencies, including FDA, to evaluate their facilities using remote records evaluations. And we did this in multiple commodities, both under our records request authority under 704A4, as well as in those programs where we don't have that explicit authority. We developed processes and procedures for requesting such records, which industry in most cases was very responsive to. We also saw firms implement new technologies which allowed for remote viewing of operations, such as manufacturing, testing, and packaging. And also, sharing information from databases and electronic records. And this really aided our ability to make regulatory decisions and maintain oversight of facilities for industry when we could not physically be on site to perform an inspection. And I will pass it back to others to also answer.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Mike?
Thanks, Ashley. For me, kind of adding on to what Elizabeth had said, there was a lot of innovation that we had to make use of. These remote interactive evaluations is something that, was new to us, was new to the industry. And it was nice for us to be able to couple that with 704A4s or making these records requests as well. Because while we couldn't always get to the places that we wanted to go to do inspections, we really did need to have some of that information to really be able to continue to review and either approve or not approve applications. So it really helped us to continue to do our work. We had a lot of work around the nitrosamines that we still need to continue on, as well as with hand sanitizers. There was a lot of testing that we needed to do. So collaborating, not only with the industry, but our regulatory or our international regulatory partners really provided a lot of help to us and to each other to be able to continue to address these issues that really posed, concerns to us and in some cases, threats to the public in terms of the products that they were using. But it really did help us to continue to do our work going forward. The industry was, continually, as Elizabeth had mentioned, continually reached out to us, either collectively or individually, talking about some of the issues they were facing and trying to get our input and feedback in terms of how we were going to deal with some of the things in this more virtual environment. So, I would, ask the industry to continue to be collaborative, to be supportive, and let's look for ways that we can come up with solutions collectively. Because sometimes we look at each other and may not necessarily look for each other to maybe make some suggestions or recommendations, but it really does become a collaborative effort to be able to figure out what's feasible in terms of driving our efforts forward, to be able again to continue to review and hopefully approve applications. So I'll leave it there, Ashley. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Mike. Let me direct the next question to Don. What FDA policies or processes have changed within the Office of Manufacturing Quality to enable public health protection in the COVID-19 era?
Thanks, Ashley. We've got a lot of experts on the panel concerning manufacturing quality, of course, and I actually want to talk about one example that we used in the area of bioresearch monitoring. This is one of the areas where CDER compliance has oversight responsibility, and we were able to very successfully use remote regulatory assessments to ensure the timely review of clinical trials supporting marketing applications, and not just for COVID-19 treatments, such as for remdesivir, which, is the first FDA approved treatment for COVID, but, also for many other mission critical drug applications during the pandemic. And, this past fiscal year alone, CDER compliance using these remote regulatory assessments was able to ensure review of clinical trial information in more than 70 different instances. Thanks, Ashley.
Thanks, Don. So lots of innovation in lots of different parts of FDA. I'll take it over to Theresa. Could you talk some more specifically about how global regulators have worked together to respond to supply chain challenges and other issues created by the pandemic?
Sure. Thank you, Ashley. Thanks for that question. Well, in addition to the collaborative work through our mutual recognition agreement with the EU and the information requests and exchanges with other regulators through our existing confidentiality agreements, and I think some of this was alluded to by Elizabeth and Mike in their comments, those have been very important efforts to work together. But in addition to that, the International Coalition of Medicines Regulatory Authorities, ICMRA, has established a number of venues for collaborative work and ongoing information exchange. This includes the COVID-19 policy TCONs, which were held biweekly in 2020, and now they've moved to a monthly exchange of information about a pretty wide range of important topics, including comparing notes on emergency approvals related to therapeutics and vaccines around the world, information related to clinical trials that are ongoing, what trials appear to be likely to deliver actionable results. As people may know, over 90% of the trials that have been conducted, at least for therapeutics, were not designed or powered to produce evidence that would be suitable for regulatory action. So comparing notes, trying to encourage better trial design, encourage data integrity along the way, talk about how important that is. Looking at the results coming forward from trials like the recovery trials being run out of the UK, the Solidarity trials and Solidarity Plus from the WHO, and the active trials, which are really more US-based, and NIH and FDA and industry, a number of other collaborators have been involved in those. There also have been policy groups focusing on particular issues like regulatory agilities and flexibilities. What are different regulators around the world doing to be more agile and flexible during this time of the pandemic and the disruptions and the emergency responses that it has required? The remote assessment approaches have been, again, an area for comparing notes with different regulators. Pharmacovigilance and the safety surveillance of these vaccines around the world, the use of real-world evidence to try to support decision-making on therapeutics and vaccines and other topics. So it's been extremely helpful for all parties involved. That's the one I would highlight for you, Ashley. Over.
Thank you, Theresa. Seems like we're even more of a globally reliant on each other type of environment these days. Let me see if Don or Mike would like to add to that from your perspective.
Hey, Ashley, this is Don. Let me just say, concerning, our collaboration with, global regulators, and specifically, I want to talk about a little bit from the bioresearch monitoring perspective, CDER compliance included, we have really robust collaborative engagements with our global regulatory partners in this space. And, leveraging those relationships has been absolutely critical to our success during the pandemic. Now, it's something that we focused on pre-pandemic, but I have to say this collaboration has really proved its utility during the public health emergency. And, one concrete result I wanted to cite was, FDA's first ever use of, exclusively relying upon a foreign regulatory partner's information, in this instance from EMA, their EMA inspection information, to support the assessment of clinical trial conduct and data reliability for one of the new drug applications that we approved this year. And, we really hope to be able to use our experience during the pandemic as a springboard into more and deeper collaborative activities going forward.
Hi, Ashley. This is Mike. If you don't mind, if I could just add to what both Theresa and Don had mentioned, I kind of wanted to highlight that FDA is continuing with the routine review of MRA reports, or the Mutual Recognition Agreement reports, for inspections in capable countries. So this has helped us quite a bit in terms of the work that we need to do. We've also been able to request inspection reports for sites that are in countries actually outside of the EU from MRA-capable authorities, as well as other inspectorates that are members of what's referred to as PICS, or the Pharmaceutical Inspection Cooperation Scheme. So that's been extremely helpful. We've also reviewed EU member state inspectorates to evaluate their capability to perform inspections in third countries. So we have found many are capable, and we now rely on those third country inspections to also inform our review of application. And then finally, actually, I just wanted to point out that although many of these inspectorates are also not able to travel and inspect as they had before the pandemic, this has actually allowed us then to use archival information about facilities outside the EU and US. So again, all of this information we've been able to draw upon to be able to inform our review of applications and facilities. Thanks, Ashley.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks, Don. I think many of us have read in the media about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the job environment. Lots of people changing jobs, lots of people moving into and out of the workforce. And so I'm wondering, Elizabeth, maybe we could start with you. How has the public health emergency impacted recruitment, hiring, and retention within ORA?
So thank you for that question, Ashley. I would say actually during the COVID-19 public health emergency, Office of Regulatory Affairs was in a direct hire, full mode to really identify and hire field force investigators, analysts, compliance officers, as well as import investigators. We've had great success with onboarding over the last 2 years, 340 consumer safety officers across the programs. We had investigators, during this time of the public health emergency, 56 hired in the pharma program, 22 in our medical device program, 15 in our biologics, and 21 in our bioresearch monitoring program. I do want to say the process has been challenging, as you well understand, to train a investigator to become level 1 credentialed, to be able to conduct independent inspections requires a lot of training, and we've had to pivot that training to, be a hybrid of on the job as well as, virtual. So we've been doing, greater emphasis on making sure that we are able to pivot our training that had been in place for many years to really address this sort of hybrid learning environment to make sure that we have and continue to have, the right experience and expertise for our field staff. Back to
Thanks,
you.
Elizabeth. Before I ask Don and Mike to address this question, just a reminder to our audience, please do drop your questions for our panelists in the chat pod. We'll make sure to leave some time toward the end so that we can address your questions also. So on to you, Don.
Hey, thanks so much, Ashley. Everything during the pandemic has been, extra challenging, obviously. But, specifically concerning, the impact that the pandemic may have had on recruiting and hiring and retention. I'm really happy to report that, the pandemic didn't seem to have a negative impact on us in, this area. In fact, we had a great year recruiting new employees in SEER compliance. We filled, over 95% of the vacancies that we had at the outset of the fiscal year, we filled, by the end of the year. And, our attrition rate was about 8% over the course of the year, which is a little lower than usual. So, and obviously now I could go on for a little bit, but, just to say, I would chalk this up to, the dedication of the workforce to our public health mission, which I think is, first and foremost, the most important thing. We also worked quite a bit on trying to maintain employee morale, as well as a real all-out effort to improve and streamline our hiring efforts this year. So in any event, we were very fortunate to have really good results in this space.
That's great to hear, Mike.
Yeah, as both, well, first, thanks, Ashley, for giving me the opportunity to chime in. As both Elizabeth and Don had mentioned, this pandemic has really created, some challenges for us. So we needed to work through some of those. And, let's face it, recruiting, hiring, and retention, was not, kept away from that or from those challenges, or we're not shielded from those challenges. Obviously, initially we needed to focus on the pandemic, so we really weren't looking at recruiting right away. But then as time had gone by and we kind of settled into the routine, and albeit a hectic routine, we then started to do recruiting, and people were really, as Don had pointed out, folks both within and even especially outside of the FDA were really driven by the mission of the FDA. They saw the issues that we were facing, that the public was facing in general. And they begin to realize, what the FDA is able to do, and really, they wanted to become part of that. So, looking outside of the agency, we were able to recruit and really bring in some good, strong talent from that as well. But as you can imagine, trying to onboard those individuals in a virtual environment is a bit difficult. So they miss, the meet and greets, the face-to-face, kind of the culture or the ambiance when you come into the office and, see all the work that people do and just really get a good feel for the FDA on a day-to-day basis. But by the same token, being able to work virtually, and hopefully we'll be able to retain that capability within the FDA, really has a lot of people considering and looking at coming to the FDA because they can work remotely. And it's benefited us in some respects because we can cast a broader net and really get talent that's well outside of where we're located here in Silver Spring in Maryland within the U.S. So it's really opened up that pathway for us to bring in some of that stronger talent that's outside of the immediate area and recruit a little more broadly. Thanks, Ashley.
Thanks, Mike. If you don't mind, I'm going to change gears, but I'll stick with you, Mike. We've heard a lot this morning, both in the prior session and some of the comments that you and Elizabeth have shared about our use of alternative tools to inspections when we couldn't travel our investigators. Can you comment on how manufacturing sites have responded to the use of these different tools?
Sure, be happy to, and thanks for the question, Ashley. We have provided guidance on how we are conducting inspections during the pandemic. I think most people are well aware of that. You'll hear about it, throughout the session today and tomorrow. For each submission, the FDA conducts a risk-based determination, as we typically do, on whether an inspection is needed to support the assessment of that application. So, we're utilizing alternative oversight approaches where possible to help us mitigate the need for inspections during the COVID-19 pandemic. Alternative tools are described in FDA's guidance for industry. So there is a guidance out there. I can give you the name of that. It's a rather lengthy name, but I'm sure most, if not all of you, are well aware of this guidance. But it's called Manufacturing, Supply Chain, and Drug and Biological Inspections During COVID-19 Public Health Emergency Questions and Answers. And we use this to facilitate remote inspections of facilities if an inspection cannot be conducted on site. So also, with CDER and CDER, our counterparts on the biologic side, are continuing to evaluate applications and using more of a holistic approach, if you will, in the decision-making process to determine if these inspections are indeed warranted, or if an inspection is no longer needed due to the information that we've gained through the use of these additional tools that I've mentioned or that are highlighted within the guidance that I mentioned. So, you put all of this together, utilizing these alternatives tools, we were able to complete facility assessments to meet our UFA dates, which are the user fee assessment dates, by reducing the need to conduct PAIs, which are pre-approval inspections, by about 50% of the time. I mentioned that in my opening remarks this morning, since the start of the pandemic. So, we are changing, we are looking at utilizing these tools to really help us maybe cut down on the number of inspections or inspections we need to do physically, especially around pre-approval inspections in particular. So, it's been really helpful for us being able to utilize these tools, and industry has been receptive to us doing that. So, Ashley, I will leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Elizabeth, your staff have certainly been involved in a lot of interactions with industry using these different tools. Would you like to comment?
Sure. I don't have a ton to add to what Mike really covered very nicely, but I will say, as we were pausing sort of more of the surveillance and focusing on the mission critical inspections, both domestically and foreign, a lot of our investigative staff pivoted to do these 704A4 reviews, the record reviews, for those programs that didn't have the explicit authority. And I will say, we have learned a lot through that. We really appreciate industry's attention to providing those records, and when we had follow-up, as we learned was kind of important to get that context, we really appreciated industry's willingness to provide that context and that follow-up. So I will say, as we continue to learn through these remote records assessments and remote interactive evaluations, we are refining and really doing some retrospective analysis of how well these tools functioned so that we can continue to optimize them, to incorporate them into our inspectional tool armament. I think as we collaborate with our international counterparts in PICS to talk about our experiences, we're all understanding that these records evaluations actually necessarily take longer than if we were actually on site and asking for records. So we're really looking to understand the sweet spot of how we use these in advance of inspections to make sure that our inspections can be focused and more impactful and really enhance our public health mission in a way that we can get the most out of our resources and be really good regulatory stewards of our limited resources. Back to you, Ashley.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. I'm changing gears a little bit and building on some of what you said, Elizabeth, in terms of our global regulatory counterparts. A question to you, Theresa. How can lessons learned from the pandemic be applied in the context of global harmonization?
Thanks, Ashley, for that question. I think that many are already being applied. In fact, with that shared sense of urgency and the increased use of remote and virtual approaches to working where that has been effective. And so and I think there's been a lot of discussion by the panel talking about how that has been able to work. And I think we see the remote approaches, whether it be oversight of clinical trials or conduct of clinical trials, or maybe part of the approach to remote facility inspection are already probably additions to the toolbox, if you will, or toolboxes. But we've also learned that there are some limits to what you can accomplish through these all virtual approaches, right? And in the context of harmonization, the work of the technical harmonization of regulatory standards is done by program experts, subject matter experts, who are generally sought after for their knowledge. They tend to be senior people. They tend to have a lot of responsibilities and a very demanding day job to do in addition to this international guideline work. So we really need to be as efficient with their time as possible. And it's been clear that difficult technical issues or sensitive issues that need discussion and negotiation are not easy to address through different time zones and 12 hours difference in time in most cases, if you bring in the Asia colleagues. And these meetings last 1 to 2 hours. So, there's a kind of communication and even trust building that needs to occur. And that's been more challenging. A critical mass of contiguous hours and days focused on addressing issues to progress them argues for some return to in-person interactions when that's possible. And I think what we'll be trying to do is working our way through and past the pandemic, looking at how to best accomplish that. It's clear that the virtual modes of operating can be very effective and work well and may be substituted in some cases. When and how do we approach this need to progress things more efficiently by combining that, again, bringing back some in-person interactions as well. So I think that different organizations, certainly the different harmonization type of organizations probably around the world, are going to be trying to navigate that going forward. So I'll leave it at that, Ashley.
Thanks, Theresa. Elizabeth, would you like to weigh in on that question?
Yeah, thank you. And I think this pandemic has really reinforced, we live in this global interconnected economy, and the benefits of collaboration with our foreign inspectorates has been critical. In addition to extending our global information sharing under mutual reliance, into other like veterinary capabilities, the organizations like PIGS, in our efforts to really work together have been continuing. I've been impressed in the collaboration among the inspectorates. Last December, we had a Finland hosted conference where we talked about distant assessment of GMP compliance. You'll notice I'm not saying remote inspections because I think, we were very careful in our remote interactive evaluation guidance that, inspections are on-site activities. So we're really looking at using these as additional tools in our activities. I will say that the participants from 48 different countries attended that December seminar. It really focused on the applicability, the methods, using modern information and communication technologies in real time to do online assessments. And since the training seminar, there have been a number of other forums where we've, through inspectorates, sharing best practices. One of the things I did want to say is, we have a steering committee that is set up that is going to really look at how we define different activities that use these remote technologies and really try and converge the nomenclature we're using so that we can better, help regulated industry, whether it be, from the U.S. as a regulator or others, kind of have a consistent approach to how we use terminology to describe these different type of inspectional activities. So thank you.
So Ashley, this is Theresa, and I have one more point to make related to this. And in addition to the lessons learned from the pandemic that could be applied in harmonization, I think the flip side is that the globally harmonized guidelines have really stood us in good stead when it comes to pandemic response. And an example of this is we had an ICMRA industry virtual workshop last July on enabling manufacturing capacity for COVID-19 pandemic-related therapeutics and vaccines, and how, for example, related to site transfers. And, both parties, both industry and the regulators, cited the value of using post-approval change management protocols, which is a regulatory tool that's introduced in ICHQ 12 and the Guideline on Technical and Regulatory Considerations for Pharmaceutical Product Lifecycle Management, which you know very well. And it would be something that it's great to see. This is maybe another thing the pandemic has prompted a more rapid adoption of this tool, which is a good thing to mention as well. Over.
Thank you, Theresa, for highlighting that. As you note, that's close to my heart. So yes, that's a good example of something I think has stood us well and will stand us well going into the future. Theresa, you mentioned manufacturing capacity, and so I'd like to pivot a little bit and ask Mike to comment on advanced manufacturing, and in particular, what role you might see for advanced manufacturing, both in terms of lessons learned from the pandemic and how advanced manufacturing might play a real role in the future of pharmaceutical products.
Sure, I appreciate that question, Ashley. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk about this. In kind of preparation for the symposium, I put together a 164 slide deck on advanced manufacturing. So if you want to call that up, I'd be more than happy to go through that in gory detail, slide by slide. But I'm only joking. But I do want to try to keep my remarks kind of curt, because I could talk about this for a while. You've heard this morning when Dr. Woodcock gave her opening remarks and her passion around advanced manufacturing. One of the reasons why I took this job as I was going through the interviewing process was because of advanced manufacturing. It's something that's dear and near to my heart as well. And advanced manufacturing has become a key component of the overall U.S. strategy to strengthen domestic manufacturing, and also to be able to help us in the U.S. To increase the domestic supply of quality medicines for consumers. As you can imagine, I think as everybody knows, advanced manufacturing requires a skilled workforce. So, you need to make sure that people understand and can utilize the technology and actually implement that technology as well. But to give you a little bit of background and to kind of add to where this will take us in the future, we've established, CDER have established numerous initiatives around advanced manufacturing, including the development of a research program. And to date, this program has fueled nearly 60 research projects. So there's a lot of active work that's going on in this area. The knowledge that we've gained from our research has helped us provide guidance for applicants or to the industry that are seeking the use of new technology. And one of the things that I did want to point out is that on October 13th of this year, so it's not all that long ago, the FDA announced availability of the draft guidance for industry titled, oddly enough, ICHQ 13, but continuous manufacturing of drug substance and drug products. And that was put out because it provides global harmonization for continuous manufacturing regulatory approaches and brings this emerging technology to the forefront of drug manufacturing. So to be able to aid the industry, Ashley, which I know even Dr. Woodcock had mentioned, because it was created under her time running CDER as the center director, was the Emerging Technology Program, or the ETP. I'm not going to go into a lot of that or into any detail around ETP. That will be presented throughout the symposium, so people will have the opportunity to be able to hear that. Dr. Woodcock did mention that we're in the ETP 2.0. We're in the second iteration of ETP. The reason being that there's a lot of enhancements we want to make around communication with companies that will likely adopt advanced manufacturing in the future. So we really needed to kind of pivot a bit, if you will, to be able to handle some of that. And we are training our staff internally to be able to look at these new technologies. That training will be shared more broadly across not only the center, but to other centers within the FDA as well. We're also working with the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research, or CDER, They have an advanced technologies team, which is called CATT or CAT, to offer pre-submission support to applicants that have advanced technologies to come in and talk with us. We have a guidance out there for CDER as well in terms of how you can interact with us around advanced technologies, these pre-submission discussions, if indeed you do get accepted into the program. So we've put a lot of time and effort into this to really encourage the industry to start utilizing and exploring and hopefully utilizing and implementing advanced technologies. A number of companies have. It spans across small molecule, large molecule, generics as well. Because I know, folks are always saying, well, Mike, is this only something, for big pharma that they can do? No. You take a look at your business case. If the business case is there to support advanced technology, by all means consider doing that, because it'll help address a lot of the quality issues that we see by using some of this antiquated processing or this batch processing or unit operation processing that we currently use. So there's really a lot of good advantages to moving forward with advanced technology. I've probably talking a little bit too much on this, Ashley, but I do have a lot of passion around this. So I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to kind of share that with the group.
Thanks, Mike. It's an exciting topic and so much going on there. Don, did you want to say a few remarks about that topic?
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. I definitely second Mike's assessment, the importance of advanced manufacturing on the future of medicine. But let me just add, that from a compliance perspective, right, which is where I sit, I think, one major challenge for the agency is going to be, how we can best support and encourage the development of advanced manufacturing technology while simultaneously maintaining, our ability, the ability of the agency to adequately and effectively oversee use of those advanced technologies, so that we can continue to protect patients from poor quality, ineffective, and potentially unsafe drug products. Thanks, Ashley.
Thanks, Don. So now I think we'll try to work in a few audience questions. So the first question is for Theresa. Is FDA considering additional mutual recognition agreements beyond the current agreements with Europe? Such additional agreements with ICH and or PICS members could help us move back to a steady state of risk-based surveillance in terms of inspections. Could you comment, Theresa?
Sure, Ashley, thank you. And thank you for the question. I think that as the discussion in this panel has indicated, that in a situation like this, even not in a pandemic, we have had all sorts of disruptions, border closures, things that have made it more challenging for FDA to conduct the inspections we normally would, that these kinds of agreements, mutual recognition agreements with other authorities that are regulatory authorities that are found, inspectorates found to be capable and comparable, and they have the capacity and the legal alignment is there, that we are interested in. We're certainly open and looking for these kinds of opportunities. There's a lot of due diligence work on both sides that needs to typipally be done, but and the existence of common training and common to the extent that our guidelines, our guidance, and the guides of PICS are pretty well aligned, and our guidance is aligned in terms of other criteria with ICH. These are all good enablers to in that comparability assessment, and so I think that we certainly are open to and looking for those opportunities. I think everyone's a bit challenged right now, all the regulators, with the bandwidth required to keep up with their workload and so on. So the discussions have to be moderated by those kinds of considerations. But I do think that's a piece of it. And the other component of this is the informatics platforms that we are developing and that are being advanced by other regulators really will help to support that kind of reliance and sharing of information, secure sharing of information that is needed in a timely way. So I think that's another thing we would have going for us as we pursue these kinds of agreements where they would be beneficial to the U.S. and obviously beneficial to the other party as well. Over.
Thanks, Theresa. Our next audience question is for Don Ashley, and this is about whether FDA is conducting remote interactive evaluations at clinical sites, so sites conducting clinical studies or at principal investigator sites. And if so, can we give folks a sense of how commonly we are doing these types of evaluations and what challenges and findings you might be able to share from our experience so far?
Sure. Thanks so much, Ashley. Appreciate the question. One big distinction right off the bat, as I just want to point out, is that, we have been doing, in some of these instances, remote regulatory assessments, which, for the most part involves the investigator and, perhaps CDER experts establishing a video teleconference connection with the inspected site, as well as a real-time remote access to the records that are being maintained at the site, which then allows the investigator, FDA personnel to go through the system to examine records. We have used this remote regulatory assessment arrangement, for clinical investigators, but our experience has been that they work better with the sponsors of the clinical trials, as well as the some contract research organizations. We've also used this type of tool when we're conducting paid and REMS inspections. So we've found it to be very applicable there. I think I mentioned earlier that, during the last fiscal year, we used this tool, about 70 or 80 times over the course of the year. Thanks, Ashley.
Thanks, Don. Let me go back to a question for a couple of our panelists here. So certainly there's been a lot of work done in a very short amount of time to address some of the questions that came up during the pandemic. And so I'm wondering about how we see science and research activities as preparing regulators like FDA for the future. Mike, would you be willing to take that question?
Sure. Thanks, Ashley. In terms of science and research, both of those, we really do need to do research. Sometimes we call it, regulatory science, if you will, because the research we do is really to help us inform both the guidances that we put out there, as well as the review of the applications or the assessment of the applications that we do. Because sometimes there are questions, technical questions, scientific questions that arise during the review of an application or during inspections, and the answers are not readily available. It's not, the answers aren't published. It's not out there in the public domain. So sometimes, we have to do research ourselves. And it helps, again, inform both the guidances we put out there as well as the inspections that we do. In addition, there's research we do, for example, advanced manufacturing, to really stay on the cutting edge of what the industry is doing and what the industry is looking at, because around advanced manufacturing, we need to also regulate those new processes, the new methodology, the new approaches to manufacturing. Well, the way to do it and the way to train folks is to really, get firsthand experience. And one of the ways we do that is by doing research. We've established a small pilot area, if you will, within our Office of Testing and Research, where we actually have set up some mock advanced manufacturing processes so that we can monitor it, find out what the critical parameters are around that, so we know when, as we start reviewing and assessing these applications and taking a look at the manufacturing processes, we know where to look. People feel comfortable, our inspectors, our assessors feel comfortable then dealing with that new technology. We're also building a center where we're going to be doing a more expansive view of advanced manufacturing, because we really see this area blossoming, and we really do need to have some more capacity and room to be able to do that. So, we are, putting this facility in place, which is going to be located around the Silver Spring site. But part of that, part of our charge by putting this facility together is then to also train both folks internally as well as externally about, what it is we're looking at around some of this advanced manufacturing, and to have that exchange between, academia, the industry, researchers, and ourselves is really critical to help us inform the decision making and how we're going to approach regulating these particular areas. And it goes well beyond advanced manufacturing, but I'm using that as an example because I think a lot of folks are more familiar with what we've done in that area. So hopefully, Ashley, that answers the question and kind of gives a feel for how I see kind of those two merging together in terms of the work we do on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you so much, Mike. Theresa, would you like to comment?
Thanks, Ashley. I think in addition to the kinds of science, the kind of critically important areas of science and engineering that Mike has been talking about, a more recently emerging area that I think is going to become, is proving to be really important for us in being smarter regulators, if you will, is data science. And it just comes up in so many different ways. The standardization and electronic format of information has enabled us to be more focused and strategic in terms of targeting our inspection efforts, the predictive analytics that this allows us for various surveillance activities has been really important. We're finding that because of the availability of digital health technology, that's another emerging area that I think as it matures and as we frame it up and sort of have some regulatory parameters around it, it'll really help us with the kind of decentralized approach to both what happens in drug development, but also in our approaches to oversight and sharing information with other regulators. Because, one thing the pandemic has shown us too is that the world's gotten smaller in that sense. And the more we can readily share and in a secure way, protecting the privacy and against cyber threats, that this really enables us to be more agile, as we say now, and work to protect the public health. So that data science piece is also part of where we're going in the future. Over.
Thank you, Theresa. Well, as we're getting close to the end of our time together today, want to ask each of our panelists if they would just provide a couple of brief comments on really what are you most proud of that your part of the organization has done to respond to the public health emergency. Elizabeth, let me start with you.
Thank you, Ashley. I have really been impressed with the resiliency and in the professionalism and the work in ORA that our investigators have shown their true commitment to FDA's mission of protecting and promoting the public health over this pandemic. From the beginning, they've stood up to volunteer to take these mission critical, both foreign and abroad, and to benefit the greater good, even if that meant potential risk to their health and sacrifices in their personal life, as they'd had to quarantine for many weeks and then conduct long inspections. From March 2020 to 2021, we conducted more than 820 mission critical inspections in 29 foreign countries. Also, as we returned to the base case scenario, we did more than 770 prioritized domestic inspections. Our import investigators have been on site protecting throughout this, the medical supply chain for devices and drugs and biologics at our ports of entry, the courier facilities and the international mail facilities throughout the pandemic, really to help prevent the unsafe and unauthorized pharmaceuticals and other medical products from entering, and also to facilitate the access of importation of compliant vaccine-related and other medical countermeasure shipments into the country to assist with the pandemic. And I'll send it over to you, Ashley, again.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Mike?
Thanks, Ashley. For me, two things I'd like to highlight, or I guess 2 points I'd like to make. The first one is that, CDER as a whole has been working diligently to meet our user fee program targets through a combination of conducting assessments and inspections where possible. Also making the use of alternative tools to conduct facilities assessments. They really show that their innovation and their flexibility and their dedication to the mission, kind of really, drove them and continues to drive them to be successful. So I'm proud to really see, how they've risen to the occasion to be able to continue to deliver on that mission, and to rise to the challenge that the country has, faced during this pandemic. We also want to make sure, as part of this mission is to ensure that quality medications are available to the public, some of them to fight the pandemic, some of them to fight other life-threatening illnesses. We can't lose sight of all the other things that we need to do as we address the pandemic. But as we too are part of the American public that we're aiming to protect, we too are patients that rely on the FDA. We rely on each other in our own work to protect the public health. So that's kind of my feedback on that, Ashley. So thanks for the question.
Thanks, Mike. Theresa, last comment from you.
Thanks, Ashley. So I think that the part of my organization, which is very small, that's been involved most in pandemic response has been the international program. And these folks have been just the epitome of grace under pressure, trying to handle the information requests coming in from other regulators to get information related to their pandemic response, understanding what FDA is doing, and just planning and running the FDA part of the co-chairing of this ICMRA policy TC that we've been having, and engaging in other ICMRA projects, and really supporting OPQ in this industry workshop that occurred, ICMRA industry workshop that occurred last summer, where the key leadership was really from Larry Lee and Stelios Sinonidis from OPQ. Really were kind of leading up the charge there. But I think that's what I'd say, that they've just been doing an amazing job of keeping things flowing, keeping information moving so that people can be as strategic as they possible around the world in responding to the pandemic. Over.
Thanks, Theresa. And Don Ashley, you get the last word here.
Hey, thanks so much, Ashley. I just want to emphasize how proud I am of every one of our employees. They've just done a marvelous job responding to the pandemic, from protecting the public from fraudulent COVID-19, cures, and helping to assure the availability of critical COVID-19 treatments. But I did want to single out in particular the exceptional creativity that the staff has demonstrated in adapting to the pandemic caused pause in inspections, which, prior to the pandemic were the basis of nearly 100% of the manufacturing quality compliance actions, the warning letters and the import alerts that, many of the folks in our audience are familiar with. And so to protect patient safety, we had to shift to the use of alternative tools, including record requests and analytical testing at the border, to support those critical compliance and enforcement actions. And, relying on those alternative tools during the pandemic, we issued well over 100 warning letters and import alerts to help shield patients from those poor quality, unsafe, and ineffective drug products. And it included such firsts as, the very first warning letter ever issued by the agency based on a 704A4 record request, the first warning letter ever issued by the agency based on a refusal to answer a 704A4 request, the first warning letters based on analytical test results conducted at the border, and this was a really big one. We worked to develop the first ever countrywide import alert for a drug product. It had never been done before, and this was a import alert that barred all hand sanitizer manufactured in Mexico from entering the U.S. due to the widespread methanol contamination that was in the country at the time. So, thanks, Ashley.
Thanks, Don. And a big thank you to all of the panelists today. Really appreciate your insights and willingness to share with our audience. Thanks to the audience for sticking around for a few extra moments. We're now going to head out to our lunch break, and we'll restart at 12:35. Thank you all so much.